Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our attendees worldwide, and an especially warm welcome to our speakers for this Daring Cities 2023 session. My name is David Corbett, and I'm a research officer with the Urban Research, Innovation and Development team at ICLEI World Secretariat. My colleague and head of our team, Poya Salehi, is unfortunately unwell and has asked me to moderate this session on his behalf. I wish Poya a speedy recovery and will do my best to fill his very large shoes as a session moderator today. On that note, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this session titled Research and Innovation Towards a Just and Equitable Climate Emergency Response, Human Needs-Based Transformative Innovation. ICLEI is working with our fantastic partners, including Mission Innovation and the United Nations Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, as well as local and regional governments in our network, to lead the way in developing and implementing more systemic approaches to innovation, planning, and governance to unlock the transformation we need to address the climate emergency and ensure the well-being of all people. Before we start the session, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items so you know how to get the most out of today's event. As you can see, you've been automatically muted. However, you will have the opportunity to submit your questions to today's presenters by typing them into the Q&A box in Zoom. You may send in your questions at any time. We'll collect these and address them towards the end of the session. You can also upvote other participants' questions by clicking the like button to indicate you're interested in having that question asked. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared on the Daring Cities website. This way we can ensure that the insights from this discussion impact well beyond the session to our experts in different time zones or those who unfortunately could not join us today. The topic we're discussing represents a profound shift in perspective. The need for transformative change is clear, with all of the data indicating that we are behind our goal to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Climate change is a dynamic and systemic challenge that has far-reaching social, economic, and environmental impacts. The way that it is addressed must be equally dynamic and systemic. However, so far, this has not been the case. We have incredible technologies at our disposal to catalyze the transformation that we need. However, innovation is more than technology, and we must use an integrated approach to unlock the full range of co-benefits that our innovative solutions can offer. This means radical collaboration that brings new stakeholders to the table through clustered and multilateral approaches, novel policy responses, proactive and flexible institutional and governance mechanisms, and engaging citizens and understanding their needs to bring about a deeper level of change for long-term success. To lead us in navigating this deeper level of change, it's my pleasure to welcome the following distinguished speakers to our panel today. Dennis Pamlin, Executive Director of Mission Innovation's Net Zero Compatible Innovations Initiative and Senior Advisor of RISE, Sweden. Masamba Tioye, the Project Executive of United Nations Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, and Luis Neves, CEO of the Global Enabling Sustainability Initiative. So without further ado, I'm excited to kick off this session with the first round of questions for our panelists. Dennis, it would be great to start with you. Could you please share with us some of the recent developments of the expanded climate and innovation agenda, especially in terms of the engagement and the tools being developed, how the concept of the agenda has evolved, and how you see the way forward? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. And it's a great honor to be here and discuss, as you mentioned, David, such a profound issue. And it's really been something that's been discussed on the sidelines for the last 30 years almost. But it's only now, during the last 2 years or so, since we've really seen this massive shift. And only this year, we've seen some really significant changes on the institutional level. Because earlier this year, the World Business Council released their guidance on avoided emissions as companies as solution providers. We have seen also the G7 for the first time come out and recognize the need for avoided emissions in companies solution providers. And I think this is very important, including small and medium enterprises, the startups, the young people, the young generation. They explicitly mention that. And if you look at most climate events, youth is usually there as some excuse and having a voice and saying that things are important, but not as solution providers. And many of the young entrepreneurs today that really bring solutions to the table are there. So I think that's also important. But we also seen Masamba has been the lead also in the UNFCCC to work with the Global Innovation Hub to actually create a space, both a virtual space, but a physical space also at the UNFCCC, where solution providers can be brought in. And also within cities, not just ICLIP, but other city organizations are starting to ask these questions. And I would just like to explain to people that what is it really? And it can be many things, but at its core, it's really moving away from a very important approach that we've had so far, looking at sectors and then asking people to reduce emissions. So you ask companies, cities, countries, and then say, who are the climate leaders? Who are the ones that commit the most and reduce the most? And this is, of course, an important part. And we heard everything about carbon disclosure. You buy offset to get down to zero. You have all these initiatives that are science-based reduction targets for static approaches. That's not really what they call them, but that's what they are. They are on this static problem approach. And that is needed. But the problem is, if we only do that, then we have fossil-free typewriter of the future. If we had this 30 years ago, we would not have the smart digital solutions of today. We would have had fossil-free typewriters. What this is about, the expanded climate innovation agenda, instead of looking at sectors, we look at human needs. And instead of looking at who has the problems, we're looking at those who provide solutions. And that creates a matrix and saying, expand this, keep on working on reducing our emissions, but increasingly bring in new stakeholders and also ask the old stakeholders. We see steel companies coming out now and saying, yes, we should not provide fossil-free steel. That's not our core business. It's providing the material needed for everything from smart public transport and renewable energy to stubs that allow people to walk without falling. We want to see how we deliver on human needs in society, but also the outdoor industry, an industry that might be one of the most important from a expanded climate innovation agenda, because these are people that look at people living flourishing lives, but not by buying a lot of stuff and not by being a consumer, but being creative. So that's also very interesting that it shifts the way, not from just assuming that we're going to reduce the emissions from where we are today, but create a better society for tomorrow. And I think that's something that really excites people also, that it's not about doing what we have today, because we have huge problems in society also. And if we only say that we're going to have what we have today, but without emissions, most people on the planet is actually quite upset if you say we're going to reduce emissions, because for them, the challenge is moving out of poverty and avoiding emissions in that journey. And the challenge here is the language, because when we talk in an expanded innovation about avoided emissions, it's about providing good things for people while they're moving out of poverty. But for people in the static problem approach, it's about buying offsets and trying to claim zero. So it's really hard for people outside to maneuver in this world when we basically have two very different spheres of work. One that is looking at what we have today and try to make the best of that, and one that tries to bring it to a new society. So that's really where I think a lot of these things are happening. And we're also super excited that we launched together with the UNFCCC, together with ICLI, the Gigaton opportunity at the G20 earlier this year in Goa, India. And we really see also people from the global south now saying, this is an agenda that we like. Because if you talk about reducing emissions, that's not really our problem. But if you talk about 11 billion people living flourishing lives, which is what we have as our key focus, that's an agenda we want to belong to. And even for people in the global north, sometimes they forget that people don't want to move out of poverty. That's not enough. They really want to see a future where they and their children and their children's children can live flourishing lives. So I think it's a massive thing. And I hope we can jump into something on the research side, because we see brain scientists now stepping up and saying, this is also interesting, because we actually live in a mentally pollution world where we are just dopamine driven, short-term thinking, rather than serotonin, long-term harmony. So we only have dopamine driven, that you buy things and you satisfy things, and you eat fast food and fast fashion, rather than creating something. So there's some really interesting research also, not on the technical side, as you mentioned, but also on the human side. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dennis, for that intervention, and also I think a really great introduction to this topic as well. It's really inspiring to hear how, from your perspective, the landscape has been changing. And it's also reassuring, I think, from my own perspective, I also see that a lot of these kind of deeper level ideas are really taking traction across different spaces. And I think that that's really reassuring for this work. It's great to hear also, I think, the role of small, medium enterprises, accelerators, startups, and also underrepresented geographical areas, and how these agendas are being made more inclusive to different voices to get better net outcomes. I think this is critical because, as we all know, everyone's starting essentially from a different position in this journey across global north and south, as well as different cities. And I think it's really important, as you said or alluded to meet these cities where they are and bring them on board in this journey and co-develop it essentially. So I think that this is a great opportunity to transition now to Masamba to get his perspective. So Masamba, as the project executive of the United Nations Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, it would be great to get your perspective on how your systemic innovation process has been evolving and what recent developments you have to share, both from the work of the Global Innovation Hub and also of the landscape in general in this space. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those that are following us. The Global Innovation Hub has been launched at COP 26 in Glasgow with a one-fold vision to leverage innovation to serve the many people and the planet. It has also a twofold mission. The first is to facilitate the acceleration and the upscale deployment of existing solution. And the second one is to identify the missing solution and help accelerate their development. And finally, it has a threefold core value that are articulated around daring, caring, and sharing. So the first of them, daring, invite those that are setting goal and target for climate and sustainability to have a moonshot mindset, meaning we invite them to set their goal and their target not based on their perception of what is possible, but based on what is needed, because this is what will enable to move away from the locking situation in which we are, where low ambition and the lack of transformative solution are both cause and consequence of each other. And then sharing is extremely important. This is about having a solution provider perspective where we develop and share solution. And also this is about co-creating and sharing value added created out of this co-creation process. And finally, it is important to have also this caring aspect, which is to have a genuine willingness to contribute to the satisfaction of the needs and well-being of the many people, but also of the planet. That part is extremely important, and it requires to have this need-based approach for climate and sustainability innovation and the expanded agendas that Dennis has mentioned. So now the question is, what can be done to accelerate this transition toward a green society, leveraging innovation? So the approach of the Global Innovation Hub is to move away from the current innovation framework and promote a systemic innovation using systemic innovation processes. So what does it mean concretely? It means moving from a linear innovation to a more interactive innovation. It means moving from a product push innovation, where you develop your product and you look for use cases, to a demand-driven innovation, where you first understand what are the needs in terms of climate and sustainability solution for the many people and the planet, and these needs are what will drive the development of innovative solution. But also it means moving from closed innovation, where entities are working in silo, to an open innovation where radical collaboration and co-creation can take place. So the systemic innovation workshop that are key element in this systemic innovation process are spaces where we convene cities as key player at the demand side of innovation, but also at the supply side of innovation, because cities are solution provider. And with the cities, we also invite other solution providers such as tech companies, startup, financiers, philanthropists, and all these entities work together in a co-creation process to first identify the needs in terms of climate and sustainability solution and formulate them, meaning ensuring that we are not just working on wants, but we are working on the real needs of the people and the planet, and then developing together options that can facilitate solution for the satisfaction of these needs. Now, the solution will not be only technology solution, it will be a combination of solution in an integrated manner, with some component being technological and other component being policy-based, financial solution, or innovative business model, or innovative way of working together. So I will stop there and further elaborate at a later point in time. Back to you, David.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Masamba, for that intervention. I think I really like the way that you framed the start of your address there, with facilitating the acceleration of and upscale deployment of existing solutions, and to identify the missing solutions and to accelerate their development. I think that this is really one of the cruxes of the discussion that we're having currently, these missing solutions. And it sounds so simple to come up with the things that are missing, but it really requires such an in-depth knowledge of the broader system in order to identify what's actually missing and what could potentially fill those gaps as solutions. And I definitely see the core values of daring, caring, and sharing really laying a foundation for identifying these gaps and missing solutions, and also going beyond the identifying of them to sharing and scaling them. So perhaps on this note of accelerating the transition by moving towards non-linear and demand-driven approaches with radical collaboration, we can move to our third panelist, Luis. Luis, today is the third and final day of the Digital with Purpose Summit, which brings together thought leaders around the topic of accelerating action through digital technologies. It would be great to hear from you some of the updates and an overview of this event and the most important outcomes from the summit so far that you're most excited about. Thank you, Luis. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, David. And I would like to also welcome my good friends, Masamba and Dennis. It's a pleasure being here with you and share with you also the outcomes of the first 2 days of the summit, and hopefully also giving you some direction where we go in terms of the conclusions that we are putting together. The summit is here focused on 3 key areas, one of them being sustainable cities. So we decided to take 3 thematic areas: biodiversity, education, and sustainable cities as the 3 fundamental areas for us to pursue strategically in the way that we want to continue to move forward in terms of the summit work. We started last year in a quite adventurous way, I must say. We gathered together 1,000 people online and in presence. This year we managed to have 3,000 people, 1,500 here in Lisbon, sharing different experiences. And when it comes to smart cities, which is one of the areas of strong focus, we put together a very ambitious program that is touching upon, on one side, policy, so where we are talking about core human needs in terms of being at the center of the urban transition. And another area that we are covering is about sustainable urban mobility and resilience, and many others that are connected to cities. Yesterday, we decided to spend a day with a group of people led by a consultancy that has been working with Jesse, just to explore and to discuss. There was 7 or 8 hours of discussion in a workshop, in a very active workshop, to try to understand the cities of the future and how can we better address the challenges related to sustainable cities. The issue of putting people at the center and the core human needs were very much in the center of the agenda in the discussion, and I think is the right way to go. One problem, though, that I see is that we need really to mobilize the private sector to this conversation. We need to bring the private sector to the table. We spoke already about the small and medium enterprises, which are very important, but we also need to make sure that the big companies which drive innovation from my perspective and are the ones really accelerating innovation, we need to bring them together with us and make sure that they align with the objectives that we are discussing here. From a Jesse perspective, we are very much aligned with Massamba's vision in terms where we need to go. We are extremely committed to join and work together with the UNFCCC and with ICLEI, with the Global Covenant of Mayors, to drive this agenda. I think that's important that we link the private sector strongly with the city's work, and that's why as we are moving forward with our conference, we decided next year that we will be partnering with one of the most, let's say, prominent and dynamic cities in Portugal, Cascais, where we will be organizing our conference. In the conference next year, it will be linked with the city, not in terms of location or the place where we're organizing the conference, but in terms how do we connect this agenda to the people or to the city reality. So how do we really engage the private sector, bring the companies to understand how a sustainable city should operate in all its dimensions? And that will be a challenge that this will be a challenge that we are ready to take. But I think it's from this connection, from this experience, from this joining forces that we can accelerate the response that needs to take place. We firmly believe in Jesse that a human-centric approach is fundamental. As a technology business association, we need to bring our members to understand that agenda. We need to make them understand that the innovations that are needed, they need to be human-centric driven, and we need to make them to understand as well that as we are moving forward, if we want to respond to the challenges that we are facing, we really need to develop those innovations in line with core human needs. So if we do not do that, we will be missing totally the point. And in that connection, we are using digital repurpose to support that agenda. Digital repurpose is a movement. We stress strongly that this is a movement of leaders. We want leading companies really to push for this agenda, making clear that business is about sustainability, and sustainability brings a huge value to business. We are strongly driven by a solutions agenda. I used to say, any company, any citizen, when it comes to the problem, it's our responsibility to address the problem. If there is a problem, if we make an impact, we need to address that impact. But I think the fundamental thing that we need to consider is about what are the innovations and the solutions that really accelerate the response to the huge challenges that we are facing. So in digital repurpose, we have this solution-driven agenda. We are mobilizing the companies for what we call the enabling technologies that will impact the others to be more efficient, helping them as well as a digital industry, helping the other industries also to accelerate and respond and help to respond to climate change. We need a planet in good shape, and this requires a huge responsibility from all of us. It requires strong collaboration from the different stakeholders, and from a GESI perspective, we will be strongly committed to work with the ICLEI, with the Global Convener of Mayors, with Massamba, in terms of driving this agenda. Mobilizing the private sector is fundamental for this conversation. We cannot allow companies to come to different events just to say that they are good. They need to show that they are good. And we have a framework in digital repurpose where they can display what they are doing and showing what they are doing. And this is the way to go. I'm happy to say that we moved from 30 companies to 100 companies in 1 year. And this is very encouraging, but this is a big shot. This is a long way. But if we do not mobilize the private, thank you.
Thank you so much, Luis, for that intervention. And it's really great to hear that Digital with Purpose Summit has been enabling so many people and companies to engage in really these spaces are so important. And it's also great to hear to 100 companies in just 1 year. I think that really demonstrates the appetite for this transition taking place from the private sector as well, when it's kind of presented in a really connecting way. And I think that's what the Digital with Purpose and Summit and GESI are doing so well in this space. So I think that there's two key themes from your address that it would be great to build upon as well in this next round of questions that we move into. First would be this idea of bringing the private sector to the table, and perhaps elaborating on this, how we create an enabling environment to bring these stakeholders on board to this crucial discussion. And as you said, not only through a way of expressing interest, but also in a way of measuring the progress made in that area. I think that that's critical. And then also this idea of putting human needs in the center as the way forward. I think that the example that you shared of the discussions coming out of Digital with Purpose Summit really connected well to this idea of mobility being more than just getting from A to B, and the role that it serves for fulfilling or enabling the fulfillment of human needs in this space. So those would be great to pick up on in this next round of questions. I see that we've got some really interesting questions coming into the audience Q&A as well. Please feel free, our speakers, to answer those via text. However, we are making sure to put time at the end of the session as well to get to these verbally. And so I would really encourage the audience to continue to send your questions through. I think we've got some really insightful ones so far, and I'm excited to get into them at the end of the session. So to circle back, I think let's start off with Masamba perhaps for this next round of questions. And Masamba, we've got this kind of background from both yourself and Dennis in terms of the landscape and how it's evolving, and your work as the Global Innovation Hub's systemic innovation process. It would be great to hear from your perspective how you connect the dots and see the expanded climate and innovation agenda that yourself, Dennis, and Poya have been co-developing, relating to the work that you're doing also with the Global Innovation Hub. It would be great to get that perspective from you. Thank you.
Yeah, so actually the expanded innovation agenda is a key component of the systemic innovation process that we are using. So, for example, Denise has insisted on one point that, in my view, is extremely important. When he said that the challenge is not about trying to improve what is existing, but we need to figure out what is it that we need in the future and try to address that. This is the challenge, because otherwise we will be working on the wrong problem. And most of the time we are failing, not because we are not effective in addressing the problem, but because we have addressed the wrong problem. So it means that the most important challenge is not about how do we improve what is currently existing incrementally, but more about what is the future that we would like to build and what needs to be done to get there. This is why our approach starts with the description of the future cities would like to build for their citizens, government would like to build for their citizens. A future that is a productive society, not an extractive society. A future that is regenerative, not destructive. A future that is empowering for the citizen and not alienating. And what we are doing is, once this future is well described, we use a backcasting scenario and try to identify what is it that this future means in terms of action now. What is it that we need to do now to be able to achieve the future that we have painted for our grandchildren and for our children? That's a very important point. So it's about being longer termist. It's about being focused on the needs. And then it's about translating all these things into action that need to happen now and that need to happen locally. And this is why cities are very, very important space for us, because there's space for innovation and there's space for action to address the needs of the many people. So this approach that is focusing on the human need as starting point and using, let's say, the other sustainable development goal as things that need to be taken into account when trying to support the achievement of the goal centered on people. This is this approach that is really the junction between this expanded innovation agenda and the systemic innovation workshop of the Global Innovation Hub. So we need to consider what is the purpose. The purpose is delivering well-being, flourishing life to the many people, and we need to distinguish this with what are the constraints. The constraints are doing it in a way that is aligned with the climate goal, doing it in a way that is aligned with the biodiversity goal, with the goal on land, and also with the goal on natural resources to ensure that we are within the planetary boundary. And the economic development is a means. So most of the time we are, let's say, we are facing problem because we are not distinguishing these three types of things. The purpose, which is focused on people, and then the constraints that are focusing on the planet, and the means, which is the economic development. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Masamba. It's really great to hear about the process behind the work that you're doing, and also where this point of connection is. And I think that that's a really great overview that you've shared with us. So I really liked especially this idea of not improving what's existing iteratively, but figuring out what's needed for a future that's productive, regenerative, and empowering. I think these are three great principles to build this vision upon. And once this future is well described, I like the idea of working backwards from it and identifying what's needed in terms of actions now to reach that desirable future. And I think this point of interaction with the expanded climate and innovation agenda that you identified, of using the human needs as a point to inform this vision as the starting point for the backcasting process, that really makes a lot of sense. And I think that it is a great combination of these approaches. So now to move to Dennis, and perhaps we can flip that question around to get your perspective as well. How do you see the connection between these approaches, and what do you think is perhaps the future of this kind of visioning process, and also this agenda built on human needs? Over to you.
Thank you very much, David. And I think it actually links to two of the questions in the chat also I'd like to address, because when it becomes, we need to be practical. And we can talk in very general terms about an expanded climate innovation agenda and transformations, but what does that mean? That means very different things for different people. So we need something both to shift the perspective in a clear way, and also have very practical tools. And I think that's where this differs, because what we have now is a compliance agenda where the best people, cities, companies can do is reach zero. And very often they do that by creative accounting and buying offsets, because the idea is that you have some guilt and you do that. And by having this focus on human needs, and I think that's, when you talk about how do we shift the perspective in business, by all means, keep on doing some reporting, but focus on what you give to society. I want to, the next years, that we clearly have more companies coming up and saying, this is how many people I help getting sustainable nutrition, to live better lives, to get a good basic education. And I do that in a way that is sustainable. And that's why we have developed an innovation quadrant, because one thing that is very important is also, what do we mean by a solution? Because if you sit there and produce steel or a nail or a wheel, and you do the best you do, you realize that I can't do that. I need to shift perspective. It's only when it comes into a situation when it delivers on human needs. If I produce a wheel or steel, I think Masamba also mentioned that, and if that steel is, if it's fossil free and everything, but it builds an oil platform, that it doesn't matter. It's only if it's used for something that helps people. So that's why we created this innovation quadrant. We help with two things. First, yes, get rid of the carbon, but also make sure that the land use is not expanding, because we need to allow 11 billion people to live here, but also that it's cost efficient, because we can't create super expensive solutions that only a few on the planet can use. So by having this carbon, land use, and cost efficiency, we create this in what we call the IQ 11 billion, the innovation quadrant for 11 billion. But then individual solutions and enabling solutions. So if you have a material, even if you have something that is reasonably good, like a wooden product or something that is plant-based, still doesn't matter, because it's only if it's getting access to people and if they can eat it and get that nutrition. And for that, you need to work with people who provide that access, who provide the recipe, who also ensure that you are encouraged not to overeat or throw away the food. So you really need to think about, how do people enjoy and get a better life? So what we also want to see is not focus on individual companies, but the clusters of collaborations. And the clusters are not just companies, it tend to include very often cities also, but also citizens and other stakeholders in society. So that kind of focus on concrete tools is super important. And the other question is really, how do we also bring the global north and south together? And I think that's one of the most important questions, because with this reduction agenda, we basically have the north doing unsustainable carbon reduction products that is way too expensive, way too resource intensive, and usually depending on CCS and other things that just keep the carbon away, but use the land use and resource use is still very expanded. So instead of having, how do we make sure that we together develop these solutions, and that the global north needs to measure how many sustainable entrepreneurs and export solutions, because the global south needs to move up the value chain and make sure that they're not just exporting natural resources. And that's where the global north should not just send down some specific technologies, but really see, how do we help the global south to expand themselves and make sure that they move up the value chain. So, and also financial stakeholders. So we really need to measure how many people and how much resources have we helped in the global south, not by sending things to them, but allowing them to access our markets. And I think that's a fundamental shift also, because that's not really the Minister of Environment in the global south. It's the Minister of Environment, of Development, of Education, of Skills that we need to put at the center to a much larger degree. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, also for addressing some of the questions that we have in the chat. I think that this is really such a crucial point, this kind of unilateral flow of ideas, solutions, and technologies that has happened in the past from global north to global south, and the need to kind of reverse that, turn it on its head, and enable this kind of multilateral flow of technologies built for these specific contexts, solutions coming out of these specific contexts. I think that this is such a critical aspect that needs to be enabled. And I think it's great that you brought that to the forefront here. And we're now grappling also with this question of, how do we measure success in terms of delivering on human needs and developing these systemic and solution-driven approaches, and especially measuring success when we have so many different stakeholders that are engaged with this agenda, measuring success for cities as well as for the companies that are engaging with this. And I think that's a great point to give Lewis the opportunity to elaborate upon from his first intervention as well. So Lewis, perhaps you can elaborate on the idea of measuring success, and also just building on the leading work that Jesse has been doing in this space and with the Digital with Purpose Summit. How, from your perspective, could your future work be inspired or aligned with the systemic innovation process and the expanded climate and innovation agenda that Masamba and Dennis have shared during this session? Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. So one of my main objectives when we started the Digital with Purpose was about measuring. We have a lot of conversation about companies doing this or that. The question is, how do we make that process credible and transparent? And so we built Digital with Purpose. We spent 2 years around developing a framework to measure companies' performance. And that framework has 3 main components. One is how companies align the sustainability challenges with the core business. That's a fundamental step. So if you do not put sustainability at the center of your business in all its dimensions, we're not going anywhere. So it needs to go from top to down. It needs to be embedded in the company operations. It needs to be connected with procurement, sales, marketing, with the employees as well. So you need to create an environment in a company whereby everybody understands that sustainability should be the driving force. Also because it makes business sense. So we are doing two good things. We are making more money, and we are also doing good for the planet. Then there are two other dimensions. One of them that we spent a lot of time talking about. We have been talking about carbon, but the dimension of the problems that we are facing today, they go beyond carbon. And I'm mentioning this because we have been talking here about human needs, and human needs is not only, carbon is one component, but there are others that are connected to carbon, like circularity. We have a huge problem, which is about inclusion. How do we use technology to include more people into the society in a sustainable manner as well? We have another problem, which is connected with respecting human rights and people's rights in this new society that we are building. And finally, we also need to take into account the huge complexity of privacy and security that we are facing. So there are here a couple of components that we need to consider, and we develop those metrics for the companies to understand that they need to walk the talk, that they need to respond to that. But one of the most important aspects in terms of measuring is the component that we have in the digital repurpose framework, which is about the solutions that impact people's lives for good. So the innovations that really make an impact. And so we have developed a framework whereby we reward those innovations that contribute for, better living, better education, better health, that address human rights challenges, climate change, and also natural capital. And we aligned all of these with the Sustainable Development Goals, because our intention is that at the end of the day, when we arrive to 2030, we can be in a position to collect all that data and show the impact. And this is a fundamental step that we need to undertake, and that's what we are doing in Digital Repurpose. We would like this conversation about human needs not only to be, and it cannot only be focused on climate, because human needs are very diverse. I know that climate is the central point of discussion, but if we want to address climate, we need to take into consideration other dimensions that are also very, very important. So it's our main objective here, really, to bring the private sector to understand that they cannot come to the climate summit, to COP meetings, just for the sake of it, just to promote whatever they want to promote, just to show up. It's important that we bring the climate sector showing those solutions that will be really contributing to a new agenda that we need to build. So this human-centric agenda, this human needs agenda, is something new, and it's very challenging because companies in their daily operations, they are designed to do business as usual and to make profit. They are driven by profitability. It's important, profitability, because profitability also creates jobs, also creates conditions for people. But we need to bring the other dimension, the social dimension. We need to bring a consciousness to corporations that they are part of an environment, and they have a responsibility towards the society that needs to be undertaken. And so this is our agenda about digital repurpose. It's a very complex agenda. It's a very difficult agenda because we are taking the companies out of their traditional mindset. So we need to convince companies that they are fundamental to ensure the sustainability of the planet, and that they need to change to do that. And so I hope that we can align as much as possible this agenda. In terms of objectives, we're talking here about the same thing. So I think Masamba and Dennis, you are more into the policy challenge, if I may say so. I hope that I'm not wrong. I'm more on the hands-on challenge, which is how do we shift companies to understand that they need to think differently, and that sustainability can be a driving force of profitability, at the same time ensuring that the planet keeps within its boundaries. We had here yesterday a debate at the conference, and the title was "Do I Have a Future?" It was a debate for the youth, and we saw a lot of questions. So people is questioning: Do I have a planet in 20 or 30 years? And if I have a planet, what kind of planet do I have? How do we shape this planet so in 30 years' time we will be living in a clean and sustainable environment? And we need to take the corporations along this question, because they will be the ones that will be shaping that. And Dennis likes very much to talk about 11 billion people, which is the reality. So how are we putting 11 billion people living together good lives? What Dennis calls the flourishing lives, that I like very much. This is a huge challenge, and you can only do this if you bring the private sector, and if you bring a consciousness to the private sector that they have a social responsibility in the way that they derive their operations and their work. And I think this is a major task, and we need to work together on this agenda. So we make sure that we have a planet in 20 years' time.
Thank you, Luis. Yeah, I think we can all agree that this is a very difficult subject to grapple with, and really game-changing as well. But I think from my perspective, and hopefully the audience's perspective as well, it's been really reassuring to see how our three panelists today have had these integrating approaches that show this holistic perspective to how these game-changing transitions can actually be achieved in practice. And I think that this idea of balancing the priorities of business and communicating this agenda in a way that is translated into this kind of business sense to be translated into every aspect of a company's operations. I think that this is absolutely critical. And it comes down to these different business models that can be developed and that shift the priorities and responsibilities that businesses have going forward. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists for these thought-provoking responses to the questions. And as promised, we're going to get to some of the questions from the Q&A now. And I think based on the conversation or the address that we just had from Luis, I think this question would fit really well now. And I'd like to pose it to Dennis and Masamba to perhaps build upon at this point. So the question is, how can we encourage a shift in the private sector from traditional business models to prioritizing sustainability? How can we get them to re-examine their priorities? It would be great to get your perspectives on this, and please feel free also, Luis, if you want to build upon what's shared by Dennis and Masamba. Thank you.
Maybe I can start with that question. I think what is the most important thing is for cities to signal very clearly what is the future that they would like to build for their citizen, and doing it in a way that is focusing on the needs of their citizen. So how their citizen will address the need for shelter, what their citizen will eat, how their citizen will access product and services, what is the leisure their citizen will have, what will they wear as clothes. And I think if this is well described, and we have an action plan to get there with concrete milestone, what this future means in terms of action now, what this future means in 2030, in 2035, and in 2040, it will provide an incentive for the private sector to readjust and reinvent its process and product to be fit for purpose. Because actually the challenge for the private sector is to be fit for purpose. I think any companies would like to have a future. And if they realize that they can only have a future if they reinvent themselves so that they fit into the future that cities and national government would like to build for their citizen, the future also that the citizen would like to have built for them, for me, it's a strong incentive for the private sector to look at its business model, to look at its processes, to look at its product, and find way to readjust, reinvent itself, and be fit for the future.
Yes, I think this is the billion-dollar question in terms of how do we get that? But I think there's a couple of things that we can tease out. One is just to accept that companies are not a thing. It's a legal entity that are lots of people within it who tries to do something. It's human beings in companies also. So how do we create an environment so people work in the right direction? And I think there's two things here. First, recognizing that companies do not work in a vacuum. If we only expect companies to be part of the problem, people within companies will be defensive and try to show that they're not part of the problem and be accounting in a creative way. So we push them in a PR creativity and innovation way. But if we assume that they can be part of the solution and we want them to be part of that, then we can work together and say, how can we create the incentives for you to be there? And that's, the work of Masamba has done is amazing. Is for companies to say, okay, you're asking what I can give to society. So where are those? Most innovative innovations initiatives, most NGOs are only approaching companies as a problem. So we created this culture of that is the only thing. If you work in a company, the best thing you can do is to disappear or have zero impact. So that needs to change. That's a culture shift in society. The second part is more the nitty-gritty. As a company, how do I set up my KPIs, the key performance indicators? So I also allow people to show that I'm working in the right direction. Because companies work in a commercial environment. They need to sell something to get money. But how do we make sure that the main driver is positive impact in society? And that profit is like breathing for people. You need to do that. But that's not the purpose of the company. So that's where we really need this purpose-driven. That's where Lewis has done amazing work in sort of digital with purpose. It's not just about more digitalization. It's how is that really impacting things? And that's where we have some work to do. And that's, I'm coming back to this 11 billion matrix, for instance, that something we work with companies saying, okay, so what do we have today? And how do we move tomorrow? So we don't just dream about tomorrow and try to excuse that, but find a pathway stepwise to do that. And that's also where cities become so important, not just individual cities. And that's the work of Equitable also, bring cities together as groups and saying, we can help you guide and see that we are like litmus test. What are you really giving me? Is this going to help people in Ethiopia? Is it going to help people in Japan? Is it going to help people in Sweden? Where is that really going to be used? So companies start realizing that, oh, if I use this here now, some people in Sweden get a better life, but people in Ethiopia can never use that. Or it will use resources from Ethiopia to Sweden. So that's a very strange thing. So just this kind of transparency for solution providers, I think is fundamentally important. But also the last thing I would like to say is we've been just programmed to think when climate of the big polluters. And I think that's the last major shift also, because if you start solution providers, then the outdoor industry, the music industry, the enablers of smart choices for health, they come into the forefront. Who shapes how you eat? What do you think is an attractive environment? But also companies like the PR agencies that shape how we think and what we find attractive. It's just a whole different ball game. So instead of this small group of polluters, you see all the different companies, but also different groups of companies that really have something and that were usually created by people who love to share that.
Well, from my side, a very, let's say, short note, just to build on the purpose dimension. I think all this conversation needs to be driven by purpose. The purpose needs to be at the center, and that's why we started this digital with purpose. So if you think about digital companies, by nature, they are very innovative. They are, they achieve whatever they want. they have that capability. And today with the innovations on artificial intelligence, and you see the ChatGPTs, whatever, and this will continue faster and faster and faster. So if you do not bring the purpose dimension and the human dimension to this conversation, we are missing all the point, because that will be destroying everything that we want to do. And so we need really to refocus this conversation on human being. That's a fundamental question. It's about values. It's about being together. It's about understanding that my neighbor is as important as I am. And we need to do this. We need to recenter the conversation on humans. It cannot be only about money, about technology, about making business. We need to live together in this planet with good quality, north and south, east and west. And this is a fundamental discussion, and that's why I'm strongly committed to the Digital Innovation Hub and this human needs agenda. I think we as in our roles, in our different work where we operate, being Equitable, UNFCCC, Dennis work as well. So we need really to make an effort, share these values, because it's around the values and the purpose that we can recenter the conversation and address the challenge that we are facing.
Thank you so much, Luis, and thank you also to Dennis and Masamba. I think that those were extremely powerful responses to that question, and I think that it's the perfect note to draw this session to a close on what has been a really inspiring and I think motivating session as well, and brought a lot of the floating parts of thought together in a really holistic way. And I think it's exciting to bring these ideas forward beyond this session. So I would like to say a heartfelt thank you to Masamba, Dennis, and Luis for your fantastic contributions to this session and your very generous sharing of your knowledge and insights in these areas. I'm sure that we've all greatly benefited from your contributions, and there's a lot of positive and thought-provoking notes that we can all build upon from this point. I would also like to thank our wonderful events team, of course, for making this session possible and for their fantastic work through the rest of the Daring Cities virtual sessions. So although this is the end of the session today, it's not the final one for the day, and I'd like to bring your attention to the second part of this session, which starts in 1 hour from now, titled Research and Innovation Towards a Just and Equitable Climate Emergency Response, Research Agendas as a Driving Force for Change. There are a fantastic list of experts and speakers on the panel who will engage in this topic and explore the really critical point of how research can bridge the gap between ideas and implementation. They'll also be discussing the exciting upcoming Innovate for Cities global marketplace. And if you've not yet registered, we're sharing the link to register for this session in the chat right now. Thank you to everyone for who attended this session, for your rich engagement in the session, and for helping to make it the interesting discussion that it was. I wish you all a fantastic day further, and let's take the outcomes of this session forward into our work. Thank you, everyone, and thanks to our panelists.